There are days when life appears to move forward with order and structure, where responsibilities are fulfilled and conversations find their place. And yet, beneath this visible rhythm, there remains a quiet and persistent question that does not fully leave the mind. It is not a question that arises from distress or dissatisfaction, but from a subtle sense that something essential has not yet been touched, as though one is living through the movements of life without fully entering its meaning. It is within this space that the idea of Ikigai becomes relevant, not as a concept to be adopted, but as something to be recognized within one's own experience. In the Japanese understanding, Ikigai refers to that which gives life its sense of worth, not through distant goals or grand achievements, but through a quiet alignment between one's nature, one's actions, and one's way of living. It does not demand that one abandons what already exists, nor does it impose a sudden transformation, but it invites a deeper attention to the life that is already unfolding. To begin with, one must turn towards one's own natural inclinations, because there are always certain activities that carry a sense of ease within them, even when they require effort and discipline. In such moments, the mind does not resist the act, and there is a natural continuity in engagement that does not feel forced or imposed. This may express itself through writing, teaching, organizing, speaking, listening, designing, building, or even through the quiet care extended towards others, and each of these expressions reveals something essential about the individual. A practical way to begin recognizing this is to observe one's day without attempting to change anything, and at the end of the day to reflect with sincerity upon a simple question, which is to ask when one felt most present.
This presence does not arise from excitement or stimulation, but from a quiet steadiness in which attention rests naturally upon the act being performed. When this observation is carried over several days, patterns begin to emerge, and these patterns are rarely accidental because they point towards what already belongs to one's nature. The second dimension of Ikigai lies in the relationship between one's actions and the world beyond oneself, because what one does must in some way meet life, even if only in a small and immediate manner. It is not necessary that one's work transforms society or reaches a large audience, but it must hold value for someone, whether through clarity offered in a conversation, through a piece of writing that resonates, or through a gesture that reduces another's burden. A useful reflection here is to ask what people naturally seek from you, because often others recognize the place you hold even before you consciously understand it. When certain patterns repeat themselves in the way others approach you, it is worthwhile to observe them carefully because they reveal an alignment between your nature and the needs around you. The third dimension concerns sustainability because many individuals discover what feels meaningful to them, yet they distance themselves from it when it does not immediately support their material life. Ikigai does not ask for a choice between livelihood and meaning, but it invites a gradual integration of the two, where one begins by giving a consistent and protected space within the day to what feels natural and significant. This space does not need to be large, and even a single hour given with sincerity and regularity begins to create depth, because repetition allows skill to mature and understanding to deepen without strain.
Over time, what begins as a quiet practice gathers strength and clarity, and without force, it begins to take a more central place in one's life. It is also important to recognize that Ikigai is not a fixed destination, nor is it a singular purpose that, once discovered, remains unchanged throughout life. As one evolves, one's sense of meaning also evolves, and what once felt significant may gradually lose its intensity, making space for new forms of engagement to arise. This movement is not a sign of uncertainty, but an indication that life itself is dynamic and that meaning must remain responsive to that movement.
Therefore, instead of asking for a permanent definition of purpose, it becomes more truthful to ask what feels meaningful to engage with at this moment, because this question allows one to remain attentive to the living reality of one's own experience. There is also a quiet tendency in the mind to search constantly for something greater, which often leads to overlooking what is already present and quietly waiting to be recognized. Ikigai does not hide itself in extraordinary achievements, but reveals itself in the continuity of simple acts performed with attention and care. When one returns to the same act with sincerity day after day, it begins to deepen, and in that deepening there arises a sense of quiet fulfillment that does not depend on external validation. If one wishes to begin, it is enough to observe without force, to notice where attention rests without effort, to recognize where one's actions meet the needs of others, and to give these spaces a consistent place within daily life. There is no need to rush towards conclusions, because clarity does not arise through urgency, but through sustained attention. In time, without deliberate effort, a certain alignment begins to take shape, where one's nature, one's actions, and one's way of living no longer feel separate. It is within this alignment that Ikigai reveals itself, not as something newly created, but as something that was always present, waiting to be lived with awareness. And when this recognition settles, the search itself begins to fade, because life is no longer approached as something to be solved, but as something to be lived with quiet completeness.